Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Brooke, in this episode, we are doing an interview with Tim Wendell about his book, Rebel Falls, a Civil War novel focusing on the ladies.
Hey, Tim. Let's get into it.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
So, Brooke, in this episode, I had an opportunity to sit down with Tim Wendell to talk about his book, and I want to read the little blurb on the back of it, too.
Oh, wait. Can I read?
Yeah, you are the reader.
Where do you want me to start?
Just that top paragraph right there. Set the scene.
Okay, are you ready? With Rebel Falls, Tim Wendell takes us to the late summer of 1864. The Civil War rages on. Sherman is marching on Atlanta.
Dun, dun, dun. Sorry.
While the armies of Grant and Lee battle across Virginia in the north, war weariness has made Lincoln's bid for re-election seem doubtful, as the fate of the nation conceived in liberty hangs in the balance. Confederate agents gather in Niagara Falls to plan one last audacious maneuver to turn the tide of the conflict.
Boom. So it is set at this critical moment in Civil War history. And if you have read Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin,
okay,
if you love the Civil War, this book is for you.
I like that he's made a main character too. So it's not just like history. It's follow this character.
Follower.
So Rory Chase is his main character.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And he explains in our interview that she is a merged character from real people who existed. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm so excited. Let's turn it over to him to introduce himself to our audience.
Hey, Tim.
I'm Tim Wendell, and I'm a writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University, where I teach both fiction and nonfiction writing.
Oh, that's amazing. And you've sort of gotten into historical fiction with this book.
Very much. Dive deep in the historical fiction with this book, which has been a lot of fun and a lot of revelations and surprises. I wish I'd known half of this when I was taking history back in school, but anyway.
Well, how did you stumble upon this story? I feel like people's journey to the thing that interests them enough to write a book is always really interesting. So do you mind telling us about that?
Oh, for sure. Sure, Kelsie. I mean, part of it is, how much time, you got to spend time with this. And so part of the questions you're asking at the start of any book is going, okay, is this going to hold my attention for a couple years? And certainly Rebel Falls did. The initial thing I tripped over was how widespread the rebel Confederate spy network was along our border with Canada, then British Canada, especially in 1864. They were funded by a great deal of money. John Wilkes Booth, among others, was a frequent person up along the border. And I was looking through, I grew up near Lake Ontario, near Niagara Falls. And I was looking through Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals, and she mentions just briefly two guys, John Yates Bell and Bennett Burleigh. And I'm going, who are these guys? And then she kind of talks about how close they came and their scheme to seize the only Union warship, the only Yankee warship left on the Great Lakes in the fall of 1864, and how the North then had to pivot and bring in a lot of people to be would-be spies that weren't really maybe used to doing that line of work. And there was quite a few of them. They used a place, one of the last jumping off points in Niagara Falls called the Cataract House Hotel. And they kind of got these individuals back on board, which were mostly African-American waitstaff and maids and things like that, which had a very interesting history, especially in the 1850s. And then how they reached out to women to try to flesh out the ranks on their spy network along, again, the Canadian border, and try to very much this battle of espionage. Can we figure out what scheme they're up to? Can we stop it? And that's where I brought in the narrator for Rebel Falls, a woman named Rory Chase. She is a composite character, but very much based on real life characters. There's some, I think sometimes I think it's difficult to teach the Civil War because there's so much going on. And I think it's maybe, I don't want to say easy, but we think it's somewhat appropriate to focus on the major battles and the generals and, okay, Vicksburg's this year and Gettysburg's here, and here's what happens at Pickett's Charge, etc. And maybe it's easy also to grade too. But I think in doing so, we miss some of the real components that made up really much, in a sense, our country just at loose ends and going at each other. I mean, there's a great book about the role of Great Britain in our Civil War called A World on Fire by Amanda Foreman. And I love that book because it kind of underscores again how many other parties are involved, and specifically women. So the character of Rory Chase is very much based on a couple prominent women, but don't really get their due. One is a woman named Sarah Edmonds, who disguised herself as a man, joined the Union Army infantry out of Michigan, fought for 3 years on the front line. She was kind of, sending messages back and forth between generals. She was on the front lines. Then she was doing some spy stuff, and pretty much left the Army just before the war ended. And what we realize now is Sarah was suffering from PTSD. I mean, she was in bad shape. And many years later, after the war's done, she's having some economic problems and kind of goes, boy, if I had that military pension, I'd be doing a lot better. And actually, in a sense, outed herself in court and to her former fellow soldiers, and eventually got her pension. And another,
we actually do have a lesson plan on Sarah Edmonds.
Oh, she's the best.
On our website for teachers to use. So that's really neat that she was one of the composite folks that made up this character. I hadn't made that connection. That's really cool. So who were the other figures that you were combining to make your character?
Well, another one, a little bit on the Union side, was a woman named Paula Cushman. And Paula Cushman also fought. She was a very accomplished horsewoman, I guess, and was a cavalry member. In fact, it got so accomplished that, in a sense, her fellow cavalry men didn't much care if she was a woman or not. And actually, she was buried in her Union uniform in the Presidio out in San Francisco many decades after the Civil War ended. And then you've got, of course, Belle Boyd, who was a big spy for the Confederate side. You've got, I think, a movie coming out next year about a woman, Rand Lenlaw, who was in Richmond, kind of spiriting out word to Grant as kind of the siege started around Richmond in 1864. But the other reason I was really trying to highlight women, not only are they forgotten their role in the war, but I wanted, at one point I was going, okay, I need some kind of way into the Seward family. Everybody's going, Seward family, what's this about? Secretary of State William Seward was arguably the second most powerful person in the North during the Civil War, second only to Lincoln. And he and Lincoln were good buddies. And I kept going, if there's a way I can use this, because Seward's from upstate New York, he's from Auburn, New York. And I decided, well, let's have Rory be best friends with Seward's only daughter, a woman named Fanny Seward, who became kind of her father's kind of hostess at his parties in D.C. She really kind of embraced this role despite her young age. And it's funny sometimes, Kelsie, how you'll start in one direction, and historically, it's almost like the history gods go, yes, you're onto something good. And I went, okay, I'm going to get Rory together with Fanny. They're going to be childhood friends. Fanny's going to look out for Rory, vice versa, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like writing that section, and I came across a woman named Olive Risley. And I go, who's this? And when Fanny Seward dies of tuberculosis in 1866, soon after the Civil War, and Secretary of State Seward is getting on in age, but he wants to see the world. And he adopts this woman who is a childhood friend named Olive Risley. And they become, in a sense, father, adopted daughter, and travel the world. And I was at the Library of Congress putting this together one day. I went, this is great. It's kind of adding up. And I went out for a walk, and somebody had said, Olive Risley, there's a statue of her kind of on the corner of North Carolina Ave and just below Capitol South Metro on Capitol Hill. And I'm wandering around taking a break, and there it is. I go, all right, here we go. It all adds up. So that empowered, in a sense, my character, Rory Chase.
Oh my gosh. What a neat story that you like happen to be there. They're like, wow.
There's Olive Risley. And it's weird sometimes when you're doing historical fiction, I think, Kelsie, and I've got a couple of good friends of mine who are maybe much better at this than me. One's Tom Mallon, who's done some amazing historical novels. And he feels, do your research, because often the research will take you in the direction that maybe it needs to go. And I think sometimes there's a misconception, and certainly with maybe historical fiction work, that it's all made up. If anything, probably 90% of Rebel Falls is true to board along true facts that happened in 1864 and in 1865. It's just a matter of finding those. That's what drives you crazy.
Yeah. Well, I really loved, my whole family's from that upstate New York area. So the opening scene of your book where they're gathering for a funeral, and it really, you set the scene of not only upstate New York, but the Civil War, I thought really well, and just the impact it had on every single family was really profound. So I don't want to give away too much of because it's amazing, and I hope our audience will go find it, and we'll provide a link in the notes for everyone to find. But is there any bits of this story that you feel like, or the history that you stumbled upon, that you feel like would better illuminate women's history, women's contributions to the Civil War in high school classes, and should be taught in high school classrooms?
Oh, very much. And again, I think we're going back a little bit to where we started, was women were so involved with the Civil War. And I think they're just overlooked at times. Again, it's easy to focus on Grant, Lee, Lincoln, round up the usual suspects, so to speak. But simply in terms of disguising themselves as soldiers, you had hundreds on both sides that enlisted or fought. The spy networks were amazing. And I find it intriguing because it shows. I think it's easy sometimes to say, well, that was that army going against that army, and it was that battle. But when you start seeing that it just went through all ranks of society, that in this major war we had, influenced everybody, and everybody seemed to have some kind of stake in it. And I think at times we get it's a little bit easy just to kind of put everything in boxes. Okay, this is what was happening there. There's Gettysburg. Okay, that was the ramifications. But I think one of the things I loved in doing Rebel Falls was illuminating the woman's role on both sides, and then certainly the Union side through Rory and what she was up against, and how she was being asked. As a friend of mine, one of my beta readers, said early on, she said, I love this character because she's not only got to learn the rules, she has to learn how and when to break them. And I went, yeah, that's what I want with this character, because a lot's being asked of her. And if you pull back even more to get even farther back from the U.S. at that point in time, Kelsie, this was the focus of the world. One of my characters, that Ben, a Burley character, was actually from Scotland, real life character, soldier of fortune, drawn like a moth to the flame to participate in the Civil War. And you had countries like Great Britain, France, Russia, all kind of trying to see where this was going to go and where they could kind of tap in. In some ways, it's been called, and it almost happened at a couple of times with the incident that I detail in Rebel Falls, the raid on St. Albans in Vermont. If some of these incidents had just gone a little bit farther or a little bit differently, it would have started a world war. We would have had the First World War decades before the actual one began.
Which is crazy, which is great. Also, I teach, one of the classes I teach is a modern world history class, and I am always like trying to hammer that idea to students that the tensions were there long before that. And I think the events you're talking about, I hadn't realized that even in our history, it was sort of building that fire. I think about, Germany and other places where there's so much tension. But you're right. It's absolutely this huge moment for the globe. And it is interesting. I mean, I'm wondering, after wartime, it does seem like there's this desire on everybody's part, and this is me hypothesizing, so I'm curious your thoughts about this, to return to normal, right? To end this. And my wondering is how much of that desire to return to normal kind of contributes to the erasure of these stories that were pretty common knowledge in its time, and then it's like a decade later we forget,
right.
that all these women were spies or soldiers or, something like that. I mean, some part of it is they were secretive about it, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well,
why do these stories get erased?
Because I think we try maybe so hard to move on, but we can't move on. And I think part of what makes history, I think, remarkable is it's kind of up to each generation to decide maybe the narrative. History is never, I think you know this as well as anybody, it's not written on stone tablets, so to speak. It's how it's interpreted by this generation, then the following generation, whatever. And in doing so, huge swaths of it, become forgotten. One of the, to go back to the Cataract House Hotel, one of the most luxurious hotels in the world at this point, based just near the American side of Niagara Falls. Again, the wait staff was all African American, and they had such a prominent role in the years before the firing on Fort Sumter and the Civil War begins. There's another great book by a guy named Andrew Del Becco called The War Before the War. And that's what the 1850s all were. I mean, we weren't battling with armies, but we were battling for hearts and minds. And certainly after the fugitive slave law was passed in 1850, which meant, even if a freedom seeker made it well beyond the Mason-Dixon line, even up in Niagara Falls where they could see British Canada and, across the river and be free, if they were apprehended there, they were going back. And that's what really brought the war home to the North. And the Cataract House was amazing as, in a sense, this reaction to it and how they kind of fought back, especially being a major stop in the Underground Railroad. Their wait staff, especially in this dining room, which was the food was all served in regiment style and very precise and everything. They were all either freedmen or escaped slaves themselves. And they were pretty much all black. And they were always on the lookout. This is before the Civil War started, that when plantation owners, whatever, would come up from the South, and they usually have, which blows my mind, a couple slaves or servants with them, the wait staff at the Cataract Hotel would always be kind of watching. Okay, they just came in today. They're staying 3 days. They've got so-and-so with them. She's obviously a slave or whatever. They would go up to the servant/slave, whatever, and say, do you want to escape? Do you want freedom? And you had to decide right then. It wasn't like, I'll think about it. It was yes, no. It was a yes, no question, and it had to be yes, no answer. And if it was yes, they were only a quarter mile from the set of stairs called Ferry Landing, which was 290 steps down to the Niagara River itself, right in the shadow pretty much of Niagara Falls. And there was always a rowboat waiting there with an oarsman 24/7, and they'd row them across. And some of the escapes were just amazing because, again, and so many of the people that were involved were women. I mean, Harriet Tubman was involved in many of these, episodes. And sometimes they're just racing for the steps, the ferry landing, and there's a crowd behind them because they've been offered reward money to get that slave back. And the race is on to get across the Niagara River. And so in and because of the, both of the Cataract House and the people who would come in like Harriet Tubman and such, so many of them are women that took the initiative to say, we've got to do better than this. And we've got to get people to freedom. And they did an amazing, amazing job.
Wow, that's so neat. I mean, I can't imagine making that decision. Like, you know, you're going about your day, you're doing some job or task or whatever it is. And then someone's like, do you want to escape? And you're like, right now.
That's right.
Oh
You
my
need to
God.
decide right now. Because if we wait, somebody may catch wind of this whole thing and away we go. But I was amazed in looking through the archives. If anybody's up in Niagara Falls anytime, there's it's a small museum, but it's the Underground Railroad Heritage Center. And it's right near the Whirlpool Bridge in Niagara Falls. And they've got some amazing exhibits. And I was stunned by asked that question, how many slaves, you know, part of these plantation families or whatever, their immediate reaction was, yes, let's go. And they pretty much just leaving with the clothes on their back. They're going. And because I think they realized too how time was of the essence, so to speak.
Well, and it's interesting because like, I can't imagine being enslaved, but I also like, it's not like they're going to a life of luxury, right? Like, no. You said, going with the clothes on their back, they're going with nothing, you know? So that is a pretty big risk.
Mm-hmm. And yet, if you look at old maps, I was just over in Canada a couple of weeks ago looking at some material, and I came across this old map, you know, and you got to remember, I mean, there's Niagara Falls, New York, and there's Niagara Falls, Canada, and the Niagara River flows between them, and there's the falls. And if you look at the old maps of, say, 1870s, 1880s, you know, even maybe a little bit earlier, you know, of Canada, there's so many settlements that are, in a sense, escaped slaves or freedom seekers. One is even was called Little Africa. And that's how many had come across. And then I'm amazed, not to go off on tangent too much, how many, when the war breaks out, even though they're safe in Canada, many of them turned around and said, how can I help? And went back across the border and then became involved in our Civil War.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, is there any question that I haven't asked you about the book that you wanted to share with our audience or make sure you said today before we wrapped up?
Good question. I guess I would say, Kelsie, is, you know, when I was in school, and I still, you know, I love history, but I think, you know, and I loved following history and reading about this character and that character. But I think what's made it even more enjoyable, or what's kept me a history buff now in my later ages, is that it's not as precise sometimes as we're led to believe. And I find that kind of refreshing because in a sense history is too elusive. History is too colorful. History can be too passionate just to be put in a box and thought, well, there's the Civil War. Oh, there's the War of 1812. I mean, things just swirl. And I think the fact that you had a spy network on our border with Canada in the 1860s, you just go, what? And yet, on the other hand, as soon as you get past that, you go, of course it makes sense. You know, people are doing whatever they can. You know, they're, you know, on both sides, their desperate measures have desperate results in a way. And in a way, it makes, to me, history much more human. You know, it's not precise. So therefore, you think it's going one direction. Oh, it suddenly goes another way. And it can go that way pretty much based on a character or two, a person or two, and what they believe or decide under pressure. And that to me, you know, once I realized that a couple of years ago, it made history just come alive much more for me. It made it much more of a human endeavor and much more understandable.
I think it also helps us in the present realize how our choices matter. That, you know, there isn't fate here. It's not just going to happen. And we have to sort of be aware that we're contributing to history ourselves. But I think you're right. That realization for students is a really important one to help them bring history home. So I'm so glad that you've gotten that through your characters and through the research that you've done. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's what made Rebel Falls so much fun to do. And, we've got that old adage or something, history repeats itself. I'm not so sure. But, as Ken Burns and others have stressed to me over the years, there are at times, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube. It kind of goes together where history starts to rhyme, with whatever we're going through. And I think it's rhyming right now. I can hear the choruses out there big time. So, and I think that's what allows us to become, much more involved with it. That's what makes history much more than just kind of a dry recitation of facts or maybe, like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for bringing this book into the world. I really enjoyed reading it, and I hope everybody will check it out. There'll be a link in the memo, in the notes of the podcast. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your ideas with us.
I enjoyed it so much. Thank you, Kelsie.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.